What happens when a grandmother's birthday is forgotten by everyone she loves? Evelyn leaves behind a mysterious challenge for her family, one that will change their lives forever. What they discovered next left them in tears. On the outskirts of the small tree-lined town of Willowbrook stood the house that everyone in the neighborhood recognized, a pale yellow cottage with green shutters and a sprawling rose garden. It was the home of Evelyn Harper, who had lived there for nearly half a century. Evelyn was known for her impeccable manners, her cinnamon rolls, and her uncanny ability to remember every neighbor's birthday, even those of their pets. At 78, she still moved with the energy of someone half her age, tending her garden at dawn and volunteering at the library each week. 4 years, Evelyn's family was the center of her world. She'd raised 3 children, David, Melissa, and Andrew, each of whom had moved to big cities, leaving Evelyn alone but never truly lonely. Her grandchildren, 5 in all, visited every summer and filled the house with laughter and muddy footprints. She had been there for every graduation, piano recital, and little league game, never missing a single milestone. But lately, things had changed. Her children's calls grew less frequent, the grandkids busier with their own lives. There were long, empty stretches where the only voices in the house were those on the radio or the fluttering of birds at the kitchen window. Evelyn's 79th birthday arrived on a Thursday. She woke early, as always, and watched the sunlight spill across the kitchen floor. There was no special breakfast prepared for her, no giggles from grandchildren, no bustle from her children as they made her coffee just the way she liked. She set the table for one and tried not to let the silence press too heavily on her heart. The day passed quietly. She spent the morning in her garden, pulling weeds and pruning roses. In the afternoon, she baked a batch of her famous cinnamon rolls, just in case someone remembered to stop by. By evening, her phone had not rung. There were no cards in the mailbox, no flowers on the porch. The only acknowledgement of her birthday came from Mrs. Walsh, her neighbor across the street, who waved from her porch and called, "Happy birthday, Evelyn!" with a bright smile. Evelyn managed a cheerful wave, thanking her, but inside she felt a weight settle in her chest, a quiet ache of disappointment, sharper than she expected. She sat on her porch swing, watching the sky fade from orange to lavender, her thoughts drifting through old memories. Birthday parties with balloon animals and chocolate cake, grandchildren leaping into her arms, her children crowding the kitchen with gifts and laughter. She wondered when it had all changed, when her family had grown too busy, too distracted to remember the woman who'd held them together for so many years. She didn't feel angry, she felt invisible. That night, Evelyn made herself a cup of tea and sat at her old oak desk, pulling out the family photo albums. She smiled at the pictures, David as a toddler in rain boots, Melissa playing dress-up, Andrew building sandcastles with his own children. She wrote in her journal, as she always did on her birthday, this time in a spidery hand. "Another year, another candle. Perhaps it's time I gave my family a birthday surprise of my own. Not out of spite, but to remind them that love and memory are precious and easily lost." She closed her journal, feeling a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time, resolve. The next morning, Evelyn began making quiet plans. She reviewed her will, looked over her bank accounts, and even called her old friend Henry at the law office for some advice. She wouldn't complain, or confront, or beg for attention. But she would leave something behind, something her family would never forget. What that gift would be, she didn't yet know. But Evelyn was determined to ensure that her next birthday would not pass unnoticed. Evelyn's resolve grew stronger with every day that passed after her birthday. The sting of being forgotten did not fade, but neither did it curdle into bitterness. Instead, it became a driving force, propelling her into action. She would craft something meaningful, not a simple act of retribution, but a lesson, a legacy, a wake-up call wrapped in kindness. She began by tidying her affairs. Every morning, after tending to her roses and feeding the birds, Evelyn would sit in her sunlit study, going through old files and safety deposit box keys. Her fingers worked quickly, sorting through decades of memories, property deeds, insurance papers, faded birth certificates, and handwritten notes from her late husband, Charles. But what she sought was not in the piles of paperwork. Evelyn wanted her gift to be something more profound than just money or property, a reminder of connection, memory, and the importance of family. The idea crystallized as she flipped through one of the oldest family albums and paused on a faded photograph. Herself as a young mother, her children surrounding her in the garden, everyone laughing under the willow tree. The image struck her. She realized she wanted her grandchildren to see her as she truly was, and to understand the value of the legacy she'd spent her life building. Her first move was to call Henry Wallace, her late husband's old friend and the family's attorney. They met for tea in her kitchen, where the smell of cinnamon rolls greeted him as warmly as Evelyn's hug. "Henry, I want to update my will," she said, pouring him a cup. "But not in the usual way. I want to set up a series of tasks or challenges, sort of a treasure hunt, each tied to a family story or memory. The inheritance will be given only when all the tasks are completed together, as a family." Henry raised his eyebrows, then grinned. "That's clever, Evelyn. And very much like you. It'll take some creative lawyering, but I think it can be done. What do you want the tasks to be?" Evelyn beamed. "I want them to walk the same path I did. Plant something in the garden. Find an old recipe in my kitchen and cook it together. Visit the library where I volunteered. And most importantly, read my journals, together, aloud." Henry agreed to draft the legal framework, and the next week was a flurry of secret meetings, notary visits, and careful planning. Evelyn outlined each challenge, tucking away clues in her recipe box, in a hollow brick by the garden gate, and even in the margins of her favorite books. Each clue, she decided, would reveal a story. How she and Charles fell in love, how she helped her neighbors during hard times, how her children overcame their own struggles with her gentle guidance. While her family remained distant, her children's calls still brief and focused on their own lives, her grandchildren posting selfies from distant cities, Evelyn worked tirelessly. She reached out to the local librarian and asked her to safeguard a letter, to be opened only when the Harper family comes searching. She gave Mrs. Walsh, her neighbor, a sealed envelope to be handed to her eldest grandchild when the time was right. With each secret Evelyn laid, she felt a mixture of sadness and excitement. She knew her plan might shock her family, even upset them, but she hoped it would ultimately draw them together and remind them of what they'd lost sight of. One evening, as she placed the last envelope in the garden shed beneath a pot of lavender, Evelyn sat on the porch swing and watched the moon rise. She wondered what her family would think when the time came. Would they be angry, or grateful, or perhaps both? Would they realize that her absence on their birthdays had been a silent plea for connection? She wrote in her journal, "A gift should teach as much as it gives. If they want their inheritance, they'll need to find me, in the memories we made, and the ones they forgot." Evelyn closed her eyes, feeling the peace that comes from a secret well kept, and from the hope that even the deepest wounds can be mended with a little imagination and love. While Evelyn wove her intricate plan, the rest of the Harper family continued with their busy, oblivious lives. In cities far from Willowbrook, her 3 children and 5 grandchildren darted through schedules packed with work, school, and social events. Text messages between them were short and practical, reminders about bills, work projects, or college admissions. Family group chats sat silent, save for the occasional forwarded meme or vacation photo. David, the eldest, was a partner at a bustling law firm in Boston. He rarely called his mother, convinced she was doing fine, and not wanting to disturb her peaceful retirement. Melissa, the middle child, juggled her teaching job, 2 teenagers, and endless PDA meetings in Chicago. Andrew, the youngest, lived in Seattle, a tech consultant forever on the move between cities and time zones. For all of them, home was a memory, warm, but far away. As for the grandchildren, their lives had spun outward in all directions. Emily was working on her master's degree in New York. Jack, the only grandson, was finishing college in California, usually more interested in video calls with friends than with family. Twins Sarah and Sophie had taken gap years to travel. Little Lily, the youngest at 14, was just beginning to pull away from the family orbit, losing herself in the whirl of adolescence. None of them noticed when Evelyn's birthday slipped by, save for Melissa's belated, "Happy birthday, Mom. Love you," text 3 days late. Evelyn responded with a kind, "Thank you, darling," and said nothing more. It was Mrs. Walsh who tried to drop hints. She called Melissa and mentioned, "Evelyn seemed a little lonely lately. Maybe you should check in." Melissa thanked her, promised to do so, but forgot by dinner time. In truth, it never crossed their minds that Evelyn might feel left behind. Instead, they planned their summers, argued over who would get the family beach house for the 4th of July, and assumed Evelyn would be there to greet them with open arms and her famous cinnamon rolls when, if, they finally visited. Meanwhile, Evelyn continued to prepare. She organized her journals in chronological order and made sure her will, letters, and clues were locked in place. She called Henry to double-check every legal document, reminding him to keep everything confidential until the appointed time. One Sunday, as Evelyn watered her garden, she heard children laughing in the distance. She paused, hose in hand, listening to the echoes of her own grandchildren's laughter in the long-ago summers. It stung, but she smiled, knowing what she was about to do was right, not out of pettiness, but out of love for the family she missed so dearly. Back in the house, she baked a batch of cinnamon rolls, as she always did when she was deep in thought. The scent filled every corner, blending with the rose fragrance from the open windows. She boxed half the rolls and sent them with Mrs. Walsh for the church bake sale, then wrapped the rest in a checkered towel to freeze, for when the family comes. She spent her evenings writing letters to each grandchild, letters filled with memories, encouragement, gentle advice, and confessions of loneliness. She tucked each one into the appropriate journal, to be discovered only if her family accepted her challenge. Days slipped into weeks. Evelyn saw no change from her children or grandchildren, but she didn't falter. She went about her routines, smiling at neighbors, volunteering at the library, tending her garden. The world saw the same steady, cheerful Evelyn Harper, but beneath her calm exterior, she waited, quietly and patiently, for her plan to blossom. And so, the season turned. The roses bloomed brighter than ever that spring, as if they too were keeping Evelyn's secret, a secret that would soon awaken her family to what they had forgotten. As spring edged into summer, Evelyn sensed time moving differently. Each day felt both urgent and infinite. She spent her mornings preparing more subtle clues, pressing wildflowers into her journals, labeling photo albums, hiding handwritten recipes behind flower canisters, and even placing a faded scarf with her perfume inside an old trunk in the attic. Every detail was intentional, a thread connecting her to her family. She also began to withdraw from her usual routines, step by step. She told the church choir she'd take a break from solo performances, paused her volunteer shifts at the library, and left her garden gate open for anyone who wanted to walk the winding rose paths. Friends and neighbors, noticing her gentle retreat, offered polite concern, but Evelyn brushed them off with her usual warm smile. On a bright Saturday afternoon, Melissa called. "Hi, Mom. We're trying to coordinate the beach house this year. Are you planning to join us?" Evelyn hesitated just a moment. "I'll be staying home this summer, dear. But I hope you all have a wonderful time." She didn't mention the ache that came from being excluded from their plans, nor the longing for even a single grandchild to suggest visiting her instead. David sent an email about family property matters and asked Evelyn to update him on her will, just as a formality, he assured her. She smiled to herself. David was always thinking ahead, always practical, always a lawyer, even in family affairs. She replied with a polite, "Everything is in order. No need to worry." It was Jack, the college senior, who broke the pattern. He called one night, a little awkward, just to ask about a family recipe. "Grandma, how do you get your cinnamon rolls so soft?" The call lasted only 10 minutes, but it warmed Evelyn's heart. She walked him through the secret. "It's patience, Jack. Let the dough rise twice, and always sprinkle a little extra love." She didn't mention the envelope she'd hidden in the recipe book with his name on it. Evelyn's lawyer, Henry, called to check in. "All the papers are ready, Evelyn. Are you certain you want to do this? There's still time to make changes." She was resolute. "I want them to remember, not just me, but everything we shared. They need to find their way back before it's too late." As summer unfolded, Evelyn made a point of finishing every task that connected her to her family's past. She visited her husband's grave, leaving a bouquet of garden roses. She wrote one final journal entry, addressed, "To my family, when you need me most," and locked it in the antique hope chest at the foot of her bed. One afternoon, Mrs. Walsh stopped by for tea. The two women sat on the porch, listening to the bees in the lavender. Mrs. Walsh, her eyes kind but worried, said, "You're not planning on leaving us, are you, Evelyn?" Evelyn squeezed her friend's hand. "Not leaving. Just making sure that when I do, everything is as it should be." With her plans complete, Evelyn felt a profound sense of peace. She no longer waited for calls that didn't come, or messages that never arrived. Instead, she poured her love into her letters, her garden, and her carefully planted clues, certain that, sooner or later, her family would be forced to confront all she had left behind. When she passed quietly in her sleep that August, the town mourned. The church bells rang, neighbors left flowers on her gate, and Mrs. Walsh gently notified Evelyn's family. The news traveled quickly: texts, calls, emails, disbelief, and a rush of regret that came too late. For the Harper children and grandchildren, the journey back home began with hurried packing, urgent flights, and the sense that they'd been absent for far more than just Evelyn's final birthday. But they had no idea that Evelyn's real gift, her last lesson, was only just beginning. News of Evelyn Harper's passing landed like a stone in her family's midst. Each of her children and grandchildren received the call at different times of day, in different corners of the country, but their reactions were strikingly similar: guilt, disbelief, and a dawning realization that they had let too much time slip by. David was the first to arrive in Willowbrook. He stepped out of his rental car, briefcase in hand, and stood for a long moment in front of the yellow cottage, staring at the rose bushes she had tended with such care. Melissa arrived the next morning, her eyes red from the flight, clutching Lily's hand. Andrew was last, his suitcase still tagged from a business trip, his face drawn and tired. The grandchildren trickled in one by one: Emily, the ambitious grad student, looking uncomfortable in her city clothes; Jack, carrying his guitar and a box of cinnamon rolls he'd bought at the airport, a pang of regret behind his smile; the twins, Sarah and Sophie, quiet for once; and Lily, somber and subdued, refusing to let go of her mother's hand. The house felt different now, quieter, as if it were holding its breath. Each room held traces of Evelyn, her shawl draped over the armchair, her reading glasses resting on the nightstand, the faint scent of lavender and cinnamon lingering in the kitchen. The family gathered in the living room for the reading of Evelyn's will. Henry Wallace, her attorney and old friend, presided over the meeting with gentle gravity. He read Evelyn's heartfelt letter to her family first, a letter that moved from gratitude and love to gentle admonishment and, finally, to her last wish. Evelyn's voice, though gone, filled the room through her words. "You've all grown so far apart, and so far from me. My birthday came and went, and though I missed you, I realized something. Family cannot be inherited. It must be earned, and remembered, and cherished. So I am leaving you a gift, but to claim it, you must rediscover what we once shared." Henry explained the challenge. The inheritance, Evelyn's sizable estate, would only be distributed when the entire family completed a series of tasks together. Tasks that echoed Evelyn's life and values. The first envelope contained their initial clue: start in the garden, where every Harper story took root. The news left everyone stunned. There were protests, confusion, even a bit of anger. David worried about the legality, Melissa felt overwhelmed by the responsibility, and Andrew muttered that this was just one more of Mom's elaborate puzzles. The grandchildren exchanged uncertain glances, unused to being part of anything together except for childhood summers long gone. But as Henry handed out the envelopes, the room began to shift. The family found themselves united by Evelyn's design, reluctant, awkward, but drawn together by curiosity, longing, and the undeniable pull of her memory. That afternoon, the family stood in the garden, surrounded by Evelyn's roses and wildflowers, reading the clue she had left for them. It led them to the willow tree where they once played, to the old birdbath, to a stone engraved with the date of Evelyn and Charles's wedding. Each stop along the way held a new story, a handwritten note from Evelyn, a memory only she could recall. As the sun set, they returned to the porch, exhausted but changed. For the first time in years, the Harpers ate dinner at the same table, sharing stories, laughter, and even a few tears. The journey had only just begun. But as they looked around at one another, the Harpers sensed that Evelyn's true gift was not money or property, but a chance to find one another again, and to rediscover the love that they had let slip through their fingers. The days that followed were unlike any the Harper family had experienced in years. Every morning, Henry delivered the next envelope and clue, each one crafted by Evelyn to draw her children and grandchildren closer, to remind them of their roots and her legacy. The first challenge was deceptively simple: plant something in the garden together. It will not grow without all your hands. David grumbled about getting his shoes dirty, but soon he, Melissa, Andrew, and the grandchildren were laughing and squabbling as they dug holes for new rose bushes and argued over which color to plant where. Emily, ever the planner, organized the digging. Jack played his guitar on the porch, coaxing smiles from even the reluctant twins. Lily, for the first time in days, giggled as she chased a butterfly between rows. Evelyn's next task sent them to the kitchen: cook my cinnamon rolls, using the recipe you'll find hidden with Jack's name. They hunted through the cookbooks and flour tins until Jack discovered the envelope, Inside was the recipe, along with a note, "Jack, patience is the secret." That day, the kitchen filled with flour, laughter, and the kind of chaos only family can create. The twins rolled the dough and each other. Emily mixed the icing, and David, after several failed attempts, finally cracked the eggs just right. When the rolls emerged from the oven, golden and fragrant, the family sat together to savor their grandmother's legacy. In the afternoons, Evelyn's clues sent them out into Willowbrook, to the library, where she'd volunteered for decades, to the church choir, where Mrs. Walsh handed them a letter describing Evelyn's generosity and kindness, and to the town square, where the family found a bench with a plaque, in memory of Charles and Evelyn Harper, who believed in second chances and fresh starts. Each clue, each task, brought with it new memories, old stories, and moments of vulnerability. Arguments sparked. David and Andrew clashed over directions. The twins bickered about who was the better baker, but beneath the surface, resentments began to thaw. In the quiet moments, Melissa confessed to Emily how she missed having her siblings close. Jack and Lily discovered they shared a love of poetry, reading aloud from Evelyn's journals beneath the willow tree. One evening, as they gathered around the fireplace, Henry arrived with the next challenge. This time, the clue led them to the attic, where they found trunks filled with Evelyn's letters, family photos, and journals. "Read these together," the note instructed, "and you'll understand the gift I truly left behind." So the family sat, page by page, memory by memory. They laughed at Evelyn's stories of her own childhood pranks. They cried over her reflections on loss and loneliness. In her careful handwriting, Evelyn revealed hopes and fears she had never voiced aloud, her worries about being forgotten, her joy at each grandchild's birth, her longing for the family to find its way back to one another. Reading her words, the Harpers finally saw Evelyn not just as a grandmother or matriarch, but as a woman, complex, loving, imperfect, and wise. They realized how much of her had been woven into their lives, and how much they had lost sight of her, and each other, in the rush of their own busy worlds. That night, for the first time in years, the Harper house glowed with warmth, laughter, and tears. As the embers died in the fireplace, the family found themselves holding hands in a quiet circle, bound together by Evelyn's last, greatest lesson. They hadn't just completed tasks or followed clues, they had rebuilt the bonds that made them a family. As summer stretched on, the Harper family became inseparable. Each day's challenge from Evelyn revealed a new facet of her wisdom and love, her carefully chosen words gently guiding them through old wounds, buried grievances, and the unspoken regrets that had kept them apart. The next clue instructed them to walk the town together and find 3 people who remember a kindness Evelyn showed them, then pay it forward. The Harpers set off, somewhat self-consciously, but quickly found themselves welcomed by the community. The librarian shared how Evelyn had paid off overdue book fines for children. A young mother recalled Evelyn's secret grocery deliveries during tough times. An elderly man told how Evelyn had saved his garden after a storm, refusing any thanks. Inspired, the family spent the day performing small acts of kindness, buying coffee for strangers, weeding a neighbor's yard, donating Evelyn's knitted blankets to the hospital. Each act drew them closer, teaching them the joy their grandmother had found in serving others. Evelyn's clues wove together their past and present. One evening, the family was directed to the attic, where an old film projector awaited. They watched grainy home movies, birthday parties, picnics, Evelyn and Charles dancing in the garden. The room filled with laughter and the ache of nostalgia. Even David, ever reserved, wiped away tears as he watched his own childhood flicker across the screen. As the days passed, the Harpers found themselves changing. Melissa and Andrew apologized for old arguments. Emily and Jack began planning a family reunion for the next summer. Sarah and Sophie, usually glued to their phones, now lingered at the breakfast table, swapping stories with their cousins. Lily, once quiet and withdrawn, grew more animated, her laughter ringing through the halls. One evening, they discovered the next envelope hidden in Evelyn's sewing basket. The challenge was simple, but powerful: write a letter to each member of the family, share a memory, an apology, a hope. Read them aloud tonight by the fire. There was some resistance at first. Old habits die hard, but as they took turns reading their letters, the room softened. Apologies were made, misunderstandings forgiven, new promises spoken. Evelyn's presence seemed to wrap around them, gentle and insistent, as if she were sitting among them in her favorite chair. That night, as the fire burned low, David spoke up. "I can't believe it took losing Mom to remind me what family is supposed to be." He looked at his siblings, his voice breaking. "We can't let this happen again." They all nodded, tears glinting in the firelight. Melissa reached for her siblings' hands, and Jack put his arm around Lily. For the first time in years, the Harpers felt whole. The following morning, Henry arrived with the final envelope. He watched the family with pride, knowing Evelyn would be smiling too. "One last task," he said, "and then you'll receive her true gift." The Harpers gathered, anticipation and gratitude in their hearts, ready at last to embrace whatever surprise Evelyn had left for them. On a gentle morning, as the sun painted the old Harper house in golden light, the family gathered in the living room for Evelyn's final challenge. Henry, the lawyer and Evelyn's confidant, stood before them, a bittersweet smile on his face and the last sealed envelope in his hand. They opened it together, the entire family leaning in. Inside was a simple letter, written in Evelyn's graceful, looping script. "To my beloved family. If you are reading this, you have walked the path of memory and kindness. You have laughed, cried, argued, and forgiven. This is the greatest inheritance I could give. But there is one last thing. My home, my savings, and the treasures of my life now belong to you. There are no conditions left. I only ask that, once a year, you all return here, together, to plant something new in the garden and remember the love that made you a family." Beneath the letter was a set of keys and a deed transferring the house and estate to all her children and grandchildren, jointly, with a stipulation that it could never be sold without unanimous consent. There was also a ledger showing Evelyn's gifts to the community and an account for the Evelyn Harper Family Fund, established to support family reunions and scholarships for future generations. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Jack, voice shaking, said, "She brought us home." Lily smiled through tears, hugging her mother. Even David, practical as ever, let himself weep openly. They spent that day outside, planting a new rosebush for Evelyn, their hands muddy, their hearts lighter. That evening, as dusk settled over Willowbrook, the Harpers sat on the porch, sharing stories beneath the stars. They read from Evelyn's journals, toasted her memory, and promised, each in their own way, to never let go of the bond she had restored. Years later, the Harper home would remain a place of gathering and laughter. Every summer, new roses would bloom, and the family would return, honoring not just Evelyn's memory, but the living legacy she created through her love, wisdom, and one unforgettable birthday surprise. Evelyn's true gift wasn't money or property. It was the rediscovery of family, and the reminder that sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones we nearly forget.